WCW always obviously made it like that Starrcade was their marquee show, and it was. Like, make no mistake about it, Starrcade was the show for WCW. But for me, as a kid, as a teenager, it's Halloween Havoc. Halloween Havoc all the way. Maybe it was the cool entrance sets. I don't know. But also they made it feel like a special show every year. And it always drew big numbers for them from what I recall in this era. But the one I've been thinking about a lot lately is Halloween Havoc 98. And obviously that show's remembered for its double main event, but not for the reasons they wanted it to be remembered. So I remember I wasn't watching a lot of WCW TV at this point. I was, but I wasn't like as religiously watching it. Like, I pretty much stopped watching Thunder altogether because it was just terrible. But I did watch the Go Home Nitro to this show, and I remember thinking, okay, this could have some intriguing things happening. And I was at my old place on Lawfield Drive, on the Hamilton Mountain. My parents and that, they would sacrifice the rec room where we, which pretty much our area, our living area. Sacrifice the rec room where the TV was for me to watch these pay-per-views every month. My father used to be a wrestling fan. He hadn't watched in a couple years at this point. My mom was never really been a wrestling fan. But they would still, they knew how much it meant to me, and they let me watch. They would either go to a movie, or they would just go upstairs, watch whatever on the TVs upstairs. So, I'm all excited, whatever. Like, still pay-per-views, even when, I'm not emotionally invested in what's going on TV a lot at the time, I still got excited for pay-per-views. So I'm watching it, and and I'm pleasantly surprised when I see Jericho and Raven opening up the show. And Jericho was one of the best things on WCW television at this point. He was one of the few things that was keeping me watching. The whole shtick he was doing mocking Goldberg at this point was great, until somebody ruined it. Not naming any names, Goldberg. But I really enjoyed him. He was a lot of fun to watch. He was the TV champ at the time. And the whole shtick he was doing, the Monday Night Jericho, again mimicking Goldberg, the personal security Ralphus. That was some great stuff. And, oh God, I remember, okay, so Raven was probably the first heel I ever liked. I told this is my ECW podcast. He was, the one who got me in the ECW. And I'm thinking, okay, I love these two guys. Like, they're both heels, but by the end of it, I remember the crowd was kind of hot, like right towards the end. And they only were given 7 minutes or something like that. It was much less than 10. I know that. And they made every bit of it work as best they could. They tried to push everything they could in that condensed time they had, and it was a lot of fun. It was a banger of a match. Underrated when it comes to all-time pay-per-view openers. And I'm thinking, like, okay, so this wasn't announced on Nitro. I'm thinking, because I didn't watch Thunder, so it wasn't announced on Thunder, but I found out later it was just literally announced that day. And yeah, it was a great match. And what I remember, okay, so the rest of the show, there's some good cruiserweight stuff. There's a lot of filler matches that also were not announced, really, or were announced last minute. And nothing was bad, per se. It was just kind of there. Okay, this is what it is. And there was nothing I would call terrible. But it's just stuff that was really kind of unnecessary and not needed. You know what I mean? But whatever. Nitro Girls segments, like, just, it was all over the place. And I'm thinking, okay, here's one of the reasons I was looking forward to the show. I was not really a huge fan of the feud with the Steiners. It had potential. The whole, like, swerves with Buff, back and forth. Like, I just couldn't stand it anymore. I'm thinking, okay, maybe just finally can Rick get his revenge tonight? And this is one of the better swerves they did. And no, I'm not going to make a Russo joke because he wasn't there at the time. But it was one of the better swerves they did, where usually in a situation where your tag team partner, because again, Buff turns on Rick again, of course, and Rick's all alone fighting, it's ridiculous. It's because the tag team titles were on the line. Rick wins the match. Huh. And then I'm like, okay, that's new, because in that scenario, when your tag partner abandons you, you usually lose. And he won a tag title. I'm like, that's pretty awesome. Like, that was a pleasant surprise. So I was right into that. And of course, that's when he had the memorable tag team title reign with Kenny Chaos. Kenny Chaos, he never got the due he deserved. But then he finally was able to, face face Scott in a singles. I remember the crowd was red hot. I was right into it too. Finally, I'm like, okay, after all the BS with this feud and that, at least they finally paid it off. Great, and then they still had to keep it going after that. But anyway, so I was satisfied with that. And then what I was looking forward to, even though it was, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. Last Call Scott Hall was what they called the whole spiel, was Hall being drunk on TV. I wasn't reading any dirt sheets at the time. I was only 15. We didn't really have the internet yet. We were still about a year or two away from that. It was 98. And I knew about Scott Hall's issues. Because they still called this free wrestling hotline from the courtesy of the Hamilton Spectator, our local newspaper, and was able to keep up with certain wrestling news, but not everything. I mean, it's just certain little tidbits they feed you in. Scott Hall's problems were very well documented. And I thought it was just completely tasteless. But at the very least, I will say this, despite how bad that was, at least they tied it into the story of the match. Which, if you're even going to do something stupid like that, or just a bad angle like that, at least try to make it mean something significant. And they did. I thought the Hall and Nash story had enough interest on its own without that. But still, the crowd was hot for us. It did something right. And I remember I wanted to see it. I wanted to see, what was going to happen here, because that was one of the payoffs that I really didn't know what was going to happen. And even though the ending of the match was kind of weird, it was Nash powerbombing Hall a couple times and just walking out, count out, and taking the loss. And so I was a little confused about that at the time, but then you realize later on, obviously the story was him just trying to send Hall a message, not really caring about winning. Because of the whole personal issue with that they're friends, and Nash, despite the betrayal that Hall did to him earlier that year, still doesn't want to see him go down that certain road. It was a little too much than it should have been, but at least the ending I thought was a good touch, and it was. But the match I was looking forward to the most, Bret Hart and Sting. Bret Hart, of course, is my all-time favorite wrestler. Sting is definitely in my top 5. And at the time, I'm thinking, as I'm watching the match, I'm like, it was okay, it was good. I'm thinking, maybe, was I expecting too much from this? Maybe that's why I've been let down. But then as I got older, as I watched it again later, years later, I think it was in my 20s, I'm like, no, this just really wasn't that great. It wasn't bad, it wasn't terrible even, wasn't terrible, it wasn't even bad. It just was a match. It was simply a match. And it's disappointing, but it wasn't a huge letdown. I think though I did think I did overhype it in my head. I thought the brawl they had backstage on Nitro was better than that match. Nitro leading up to it. And I think, okay, well then Hogan Warrior. Hogan Warrior at WrestleMania 6 was a huge, significant part of my fandom growing as a kid. It's very significant in my life. It still is to this day, that match and that feud at WrestleMania 6. And even though I had seen a lot of, I'd missed some of the build-up, I'd seen some of it. I saw the magic mirror thing, which was so ridiculously terrible. It's what they were going for didn't really translate. So I was so everyone but Bischoff can see Warrior, we can all see him, Hogan can see him. I think even the commentators saw him. So Bischoff's the crazy one? It's supposed to be trying to make Hulk the crazy one. When Warrior first arrived in the company in August of that year, I was excited. And, he hadn't been on TV in over 2 years at that point. He left the WWF under weird circumstances, so I was intrigued to see him back, and I knew he was going to feud with Hogan. And again, a Hogan, like people can say we never won a Hogan Warrior 2. Bullshit. You definitely want to see that match that was first, and that the confrontation first happened, but then the confrontation itself was a little, yeah. But either way, it didn't really lose its intrigue until the build-up truly kicked into high gear. And I just think people were just shaking their heads. At that point, I know I was. But I'm watching the pay-per-view. I'm thinking, okay, you know what? We'll see what they can do here. I gave it a chance. I think by the middle of the match, I was reading the ingredients on my bag of Lay's ketchup chips. And I think I started reading my NFL facts, figures, and records book that I had just gotten. Yeah, it was bad. And I mean, a lot's been said about that match already. I really can't add anything new to it. I'll just say this. If I thought the Montreal Screwjob scarred my childhood because of my fandom for Bret Hart, nothing on that match. That's what I will say. Nothing on that match. Nothing on that match. It was just terrible. Like, okay, well, I still have DDP and Goldberg. And I know what you're expecting. I know what you're expecting. My feed didn't cut out. However, I remember as the match was getting underway, my mom came downstairs and she's like, "Is it not over yet?" She's like, "It's already 11 o'clock. I'm like, "Yeah, because it's a school night, right? So I usually had to go to bed right after the pay-per-views ended." And I said, "No, it's the main event now. It's the last match." And she said, "Okay, well, you should get ready for bed as soon as it's over, right?" And like, she wasn't, like, "No, go to bed. It's 11." My mom was not strict that way when it came to her. She knows she'll let me watch the show till the end, no matter what time it ended. And something in my head, it's a Goldberg match. It's not going to go that long. I mean, it went longer than most Goldberg matches, but it still wasn't like an overly long match. So, literally, maybe about not even a minute after my mom walks back upstairs, the phone rings. And I pick up, it's my friend Mark. Now, Mark's a few years older than me, so he's at a bar. I mentioned him on my tape trading podcast. He was when I traded tapes with him that. He's at a bar, and I can't remember if it's Filthy McNasty's. I know it was on the Mountain in Hamilton. I don't even know if Filthy's was open yet at that point. But either way, it was a bar on Upper James. I know that. And he's like, "Dude, what the hell happened?" I'm like, "What?" He's like, "What do you mean? Like, the pay-per-view?" I'm like, "I'm still watching it." He's like, "How?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Dude, the pay-per-view cut off." I'm like, "No, it didn't." He's like, "Yeah, dude, I'm here at the bar right now. Like, everything cut off." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "We're getting nothing but the color bar." Then he said, "Now the replay's starting." Or they're counting down, one of the two. So they're counting down the replay or the replay starting. Or they're doing the countdown show, whatever again. I'm like, "I'm still watching the pay-per-view, dude. It's DDP Goldberg. I watched them right now. I was even telling him what they were doing." And he's like, "What?" I think obviously the bar probably had a satellite, so probably whatever satellite system they were, their feed cut out, and I had cable. We had cable. I guess our cable system was one of the ones that kept going. It was not as large a number as people think. It was a very small percentage of pay-per-view systems like that, but enough still where they had enough complaints, obviously. But no, I'm telling him what's going on in the match, and he's like, "Okay, well, stay on the phone with me." I'm like, "Okay." I could hear people behind him. I could hear, obviously scattered noise. People weren't happy about the feed cutting out. And so, going on. I remember the moment when DDP reversed the jackhammer to the Diamond Cutter, and I lost it too. Like, "Oh my God, he just reversed the jackhammer, Diamond Cutter. And Mark's freaked out. And I was like, "Oh shit." And I could tell he's talking to the people in the bar. He's like, "Yo, he just hit the Diamond Cutter to the jackhammer. 1, 2. I'm counting along like I'm calling the match. They're like, "Oh, Goldberg got his shoulder up." He's like, "Oh my God." He's like, "We thought the streak was over for a split second there." And then, okay, Goldberg eventually won. That was a great match. And he's like, "Okay." He's like, "Thanks a lot, dude." And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, and I can hear him, "Yeah, Goldberg won. And then I could hear actually some people clapping in the background. But, yeah. That was Halloween Havoc 98 for me. And it's funny because I do remember hearing, I didn't watch Nitro that week, I do remember knowing that, I was talking to friends of mine at school, they re-aired the match in its entirety on Nitro. Now, here's the funny thing about that. Obviously not really truly realizing the consequences back then. The people who got their feed cut off were pissed off because, well, they missed the main event. And probably after watching that Hogan Warrior shit show, they probably wanted to see something decent. And they weren't able to. Literally, I think the cutoff, when they just started to lock up, I think that spot they locked up at the beginning of the match and tumbled out of the ring. And then, obviously they're pissed off, so they want their money back. Well, no problem. We'll just we'll air for free for you on Nitro. So that pisses off the people who spent money to order that match and watch that match. So WCW really screwed the pooch on that one. And just a sign of things to come for them, I guess. Bad omen. People thought it was the finger poke of doom. Nope. Definitely not. It was this show. And I still won't forget it. Again, the shit show that was Hogan and Warrior. The fact that I actually got to see that main event of DDP and Goldberg. I thought it was special because the feed cut out at the time. I didn't realize it was a small number. that kind of like, compared to like this, the less portion of the audience. Like, still a large portion saw it. But yeah, I thought it was special. But WCW Halloween Havoc. Almost every year. Even the weird spin the wheel, make the deal stuff in the early 90s. Always had its intrigue.